I have two best friends from high school. Jeremy lives in southern Minnesota, where we went to high school, and our other best friend, Tyler, lives in Denmark. And as happens when you start to get a little bit older and don't live in the same town, we haven't seen each other on a regular basis for a number of years. But when the pandemic started, we decided that we were going to be doing a monthly get together on Zoom. So each first Saturday of every month, we get together on Zoom in the afternoon, talk for about an hour. So this last weekend happened to be our meeting weekend, and it was also Jeremy's birthday. So I had driven down from Minneapolis to hang out with him. And so we were in the same place, but because we're meeting on Zoom, I was on my phone, he was on his phone. And of course, Tyler's in Denmark. So I'm standing in his driveway. He's sitting on his porch in the back of the house. Tyler's in Denmark. And because of the pandemic, I've been spraying my phone with bleach water on a consistent basis. And so there's this film of bleach water on my phone, and I can't see the phone because of the sun reflecting off of the bleach water that's on my phone. So I'm trying to wipe it off, and I shut down Zoom several times while we're talking. And then Jeremy's two daughters are, in the meantime, making fun of us because here we are, these Gen Xers, not understanding that because we're in the same place, we could be together talking on the same phone. And it just jumped into my mind that this week we're going to be talking about some of these exact issues, things that the pandemic has changed in your life. And it was just kind of the crystallization of a number of different things about the pandemic all at one moment. So with that, we will start episode 50 of the Valuability Podcast, Building High Performance Teams in a Virtual World. The Valuability Podcast is for anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. Whether you are a financial professional, business owner, individual investor, or employee, we believe that financial success comes from creating a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will get you there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I'm joined each week by my co-host, friend, and mentor, Philip Simonson. We have been in the financial services industry for 20 and 40 years, respectively, both as financial advisors and in a wide range of roles on the wholesale and retail sides of the business. This week, we are very happy to be joined by a good friend, Todd Mauney, president of ROI Coaching Solutions. Todd, now I just totally mispronounced your name again. I've always pronounced it Mauney, and then on your video on your website, I noticed that you pronounced it differently, and then I just pronounced it wrong again, right?
It's all right, man. Happens all the time.
So it's Todd Mauney, correct?
That's close enough. I just used the Mauney.
Like
the song. Think of the song. Billy Idol.
Mauney. 60s, I like it. I can recollect that song, 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find Todd's website at roicoachingsolutions.com, and you can reach him on email at todd@myroicoach.com, or you can reach him by phone at 704-634-3180. And as usual, we will put all of his contact information on our website at value-ability.com under the content tab. Now, along that line, Todd, I noticed that I had been mispronouncing your name from looking at the intro video that you have on your website. And actually, in that video, you told a story about how you got into your current business. And I had never heard that story before. And I think it's a great place for us to start, kind of give listeners an idea of your history and how you've gotten to this point.
Sure. Yeah. I'm glad to be here, guys. I tell you, it wasn't something that was planned, quite honestly. It came through a series of interesting events. But I spent 12 years in the corporate sales world as a sales executive and sales professional. And I often say I ended up with more money at the time than I had common sense, and I had a bleeding heart for a brother-in-law and best friend that was a starving artist out of the garage. And he came to me one day when I was working with ADP, Automatic Data Processing, and said, "Hey, I found this great business. If you'll buy it, I'll run it." And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I had an entrepreneurial itch. I thought it would be worth scratching that itch. And I said, sure, let's do it. And I made the move. About 3 to 5 months into it, I realized that the company was bleeding and hemorrhaging money, like I, couldn't believe. And if anybody bought or purchased a small business, it's kind of hard to do the due diligence and know, especially if it's a large cash-based business, how exactly the cash is flowing. But long story short, I suffered through it for about a year before I finally decided that if I wanted to save my investment, I needed to jump out of a six-figure corporate gig and jump in and try to save it. So I did that. I took a leap of faith. I developed a turnaround strategy. That's where I got my first taste of really that corporate consulting and coaching experience that I evolved into. And about a year later, we went from the red to the black. We were doing exceptionally well. And the owner's son, who was a key man in the business at the time, decided he thought he could build the business better himself. And he ended up sabotaging my business. He spent, unfortunately, about 6 months preparing for this move. And my wife and I took a 10-year anniversary trip out to Napa Valley, came back, walked in the door. He met me at the door, gave me the key, and said, "This isn't working out," and walked out the door. Once I picked my jaw up off the floor and gathered my thoughts.
Happy anniversary, huh?
Yeah, right. I said, I better look around and see what's going on because I've been gone for a week, and that just happened. So I looked around. All my computers were gone. All my client files and folders and artwork and everything was gone. And apparently, several weeks later, after doing some due diligence and some investigative work, I found out that he had been planning this for 6 months and had been funneling some business through his little sideline business. And that was his final move. So that was August of 2001. And then, of course, you know what happened the next month.
Right.
Right? 9/11. And that just completely took the legs out from underneath me because business was immediately in major decline after he moved out the door. He was actually, one big mistake that I made was I allowed him to handle most of the sales. So he had most of the relationships. And I'm sure many of the listeners on the call can appreciate that if they've been in a sales world or sales environment, the risk of giving somebody control of your relationships, your client relationships. So, that happened immediately. Then 9/11 happened, and within about a month, I found myself with tremendous overhead and very little revenue, and we know where that leads.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reeling pretty bad and decided to sell off every asset that I had. Fortunately, I had enough foresight to know where my strengths were, which was sales. So I started contracting a lot of the work out rather than manufacturing it in-house. And that gave me at least the resources to be able to continue doing the work without having to actually have the equipment and all the resources to do it in-house. So I reverted back to my skill set, went out there, started cultivating new business. And then within about a month, my best friend and brother-in-law, who convinced me to make this move to begin with, decided he couldn't weather the storm any longer and he needed to jump ship. So he took the remaining signed clients that we had and took them to a competitor. So I was in a bad place. I won't lie. I was in four walls, looking at the walls, going, "What in the hell am I doing here? What did I do?" And it was through that experience and actually taking one last trip up to my big manufacturing facility to clear out some final items that I discovered going through the radio, a couple ladies talking on a talk show program about business coaching. And I just became impassioned by what they were talking about. And I thought, my God, there's people out there all the time running through situations like I just went through, making mistakes. And I've always had a knack for and an affinity, a passion for helping people avoid those potholes if I could help them do it. And I thought, man, it would be awesome to be able to do that for a living. And so I reached out to one of the founders of the International Coach Federation, which is the basically the watchdog of the coaching industry, and ran into David Woods, who was one of the founding principals. And he said, I feel you. I appreciate your story and I want to help you. And he hooked me up with one of his mentees out of the UK. And we did a coaching stint for about 6 months. And the crazy thing was, you would think that she would start out with, let's get a business plan together, let's figure out what you're going to do next, and all that kind of stuff. But she didn't start there. She started with the head. She started with my thinking. She knew I had to get it out of that victim modality, that victim mentality, and really take ownership and my power back. And she also helped me to, regain my health, focus on the basics, right, Philip? I mean, get back to the basics. Are you exercising? Are you eating well? Are you getting your sleep? Because if you don't have all that going for you, it's going to be really hard to dig yourself out of this. You need your energy. You need your passion. You need your clarity of mind. So she helped me regain all that stuff. And with that came the business plan and all that. And that really sprung me into the coaching space. Now, I didn't go right into coaching, but I actually had an opportunity to get into consulting with someone in the church space. Basically, I started coaching and consulting pastors and consulting churches for about 3 years there. Found myself, unfortunately, doing a lot of mediation work, conflict mediation.
Mm-hmm.
And that really tapped into another sweet spot that I had, which was helping people work through conflict to be able to collaborate, communicate, and work more effectively together to achieve their vision. So what I was doing with pastors is really helping them create a vision for their church and really coalesce, get the whole church around that, embracing that, buying into it, and moving in the same direction together. Where a lot of these smaller churches that I was involved with were just caught up in a lot of infighting.
Right.
And I find now that that's happening in a lot of businesses.
Well, I was going to say, my brother's a pastor of a church, or was now since retired. But I always looked at it too as the pastors are just they're the CEO. They're running an organization.
Exactly.
But it occurred to me that it always jumps out when I hear something like that of, wow, of course pastors need a coach too. It never occurred to me, but like I said, it's no different than any other team, whether you call it a business or a church community or a nonprofit or whatever the community is. It's still in essence a team.
Mm-hmm.
It's leadership. It's leadership. It's influence. It's organizing. Developing structures to support everybody moving in the same direction, towards the same goal, the same vision, with the same mission and purpose.
Exactly. And we're here, it's probably a good segue to talk about creating performance, winning performance cultures in the virtual world. And Todd, what do you 2001, we had 9/11. Here we are again. We've seen a few crises, 2008. And we just lived through this, the COVID pandemic. What do you see as, post-COVID in regard to the working environment? How would a senior leader or the CEO or a team, the executive team, go about creating one?
Well, it always starts, especially when we go through crisis, with an assessment of ourselves as leaders, right? We've got to look inward before we can look outward. Unfortunately, we know from a lot of assessments and a lot of studies that leaders are much clearer about the world around them than they are about themselves. And it is what it is, right? It's frustrating because for anything to change, I must change as a leader first. And that's the epiphany that us leaders have to have, is we've got to start by looking at ourselves, especially when we're in a state of crisis. And I've laid out, 7 steps to creating and leveraging a high performance culture. And that's step one. It's really hitting the reset button with my own mindset as a leader. It's looking inward. It's taking the time to really assess what are my belief systems about the situation that I'm in right now? What do I believe about myself in this situation? And how am I leading my team through this? Am I inspiring them, or am I actually being a victim with them of these circumstances?
I loved what you said, Todd. Just right there is it. Two things that stood out for me is, look, if change is going to occur, it must begin with me.
Mm,
So you gotta start doing that inward reflection. And it's nice to have a coach. And I'm not what I've personally found in running large organizations, small organizations, etc. As the leader, you get blinded, you get your biases, and if you don't get a truth teller to help you do that inward reflection, you're never going to get the clarity you need to take. I'm sure we're going to cover it the next step, but uh, it's just a personal observation.
I've seen as well an interesting generational issue in that my generation, Gen X, has traditionally looked at the boomers and seen them as kind of this intransigent generation that doesn't want to change, that doesn't want to adapt to technology. But in the last several weeks, I've had a number of clients and other people that I know in my generation have this exact same response of rejecting. I'm tired of this pandemic. I'm tired of meeting on Zoom. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of that. And my feedback to them, first and foremost, has been, you really need to take a step back and look at yourself first. Like, this is happening,
The new normal.
and it is going to be a new normal. And now we may go back. We're going to talk later in the article review about going back into offices. We are going to go back into offices in some way or shape, but for the rest of future time, virtual business is going to continue to grow. It may not stay at this level right now, but it is going to continue to be a thing, and it is only going to grow.
yes, no doubt. And to your point, Philip, the way we experience the world, all that experience, how we take it in, auditorily, visually, everything else really goes through our filters, right?
Hmm.
So it's really how we see the world around us that allows us to interpret things in a way that's more empowering, that allows us to get out of this victim mindset and to really see opportunity, turn lemons into lemonades, essentially, right?
Right.
And that's why it's so important that we look at our own thinking around this situation. And what is normal? I mean, these days, we want to all seek normalcy, but really that's what's familiar with us and or familiar to us. And gosh, we really just need to be flexible, because this environment is, it's a pandemic today. It could be something else tomorrow. I mean, the constant in the world is change. And that's really where we have to be as leaders these days. We have to really be adaptive to change. And that's all the more reason why we have to invest in our own personal development. Because how we think, how we perceive, how we interpret information is that's what creates the emotion that drives the behavior that drives the results in our business. You know that, Philip. And if we don't start at the source, which is our thinking, the way we're processing and filtering and screening the information and interpreting that information, then we can't change those emotions. We remain in this state of, maybe it's depression, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's frustration, but those are all, debilitating emotions that keep us stuck.
Correct.
And that's the one thing we don't want to do in this environment, is be stuck.
Right. Always be learning. So that was the first step. What would be the second step that you've found?
Yeah, so with that new perception of the world around us, by doing some internal thought processing there, we hopefully can create a new sense of clarity about the future. So let's assess where we are. Let's assess our circumstances. Let's, flip over this victim mentality into an empowering victor mentality, and let's find the opportunity in this. And that's putting together a game plan. That's looking ahead and setting goals and a vision for ourselves and for our team that we can all coalesce around and get excited about again. And we have to try really hard. We have to work really hard as leaders to do that, because if we can't inspire our teams, boy, we're going to be in a bad situation.
Yes.
Well, and this is really, I think, the most obviously, nothing can happen unless you look at yourself first. But so much of what we're going through right now is due to the fact that 12 months ago, we had no idea how long this was going to last. Now, if we rewound 12 months and told everybody, hey, this is 15 to 18 months out, certainly we would have put some resources toward trying to figure some of this stuff out. But it's just kind of been piecemeal over time of, oh, we're going to get back to normal by Easter. Oh, we're going to get back to normal by 4th of July. Oh, we're going to get back to normal by Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
And it just keeps getting, the can keeps getting kicked down the road. And I probably last summer started saying, no, adapt now. Figure out how to do things in this manner. And when we go back, we know how to do what we've done in the past, but we'll also have this in our arsenal as well. So I absolutely agree. Let's get that plan down and start working towards it.
Absolutely. As the scripture goes, where there's no vision, the people will perish, right? So we've got to have a North Star, especially when we're in the midst of a storm. We're gonna be all over the place a little bit, but if we have a North Star, we're still going to be heading in the general right direction. And think about the water analogy. Stagnant water is ugly. It gets nasty. Water, if it's channeled and it can flow in a direction, is usually clean. It's flourishing. It's got power, and that's what we need. The folks that are in our businesses are that energy. They're that water energy. We've
Right.
got to give them a direction to flow so that we can channel that energy and do something powerful with it. And that's what a plan does.
And as you go, your step two, and it's really literally 12 months ago. I mean, the streets were quiet. There was nothing in the streets. Everyone started working from home, etc. And I remember one guy being interviewed. I'm sure it was on CNBC, and what our business is going to do 3 months from now, or the guy said, stop, don't even go 6, don't even go 12. It's one day at a time right now. It is a whole new world. As a leader, you've got to take it one day at a time. And it also, you reference a great point that I was taught right in my first job from one of my mentors. The first job of a leader is to find current reality in a non-obscure way. And and you have to really take a look at where are you, in the current state, and where do you want to be. And oftentimes the difference in between is pain and growth.
Exactly.
So I love exactly what you're saying there. So
And along with a good, and it doesn't have to be a sophisticated plan. We're not talking about a plan you're going to take down to the bank and get a loan for. We're talking about something just to give you a sense of direction, something to shoot for, and give your team something that they can coalesce around. And a team charter as a part of that's also helpful, because it basically says this is what we're going to be about, and this is what we're not going to be about as a team. We need those boundaries. We need those boundaries in our thinking, because it's so easy to digress and to start thinking negative thoughts and to start infighting. And we need to channel our energy. I mean, you think about a room full of kids. If they have no direction, no instruction, no guiding principles or structures, oh my gosh, it's chaos. My wife was a preschool teacher for years. I can tell you, it's crazy.
Yes.
It's also easy to get caught up in the woulda, coulda, shoulda thought process as well at this point and say, oh, I should have known this. I should have known that. Maybe, maybe not. Not a lot of people last summer were saying, hey, adapt to the virtual world. So empty that out. Like you said, take a look at your own thinking, move past that. You can't alter what has happened. Get that plan in place. And how do we then progress after you've got that idea for a plan?
Well, once you empower the culture, which is the collective personalities of your team, remember we're not talking about organizations. We're talking about organisms. We're talking about a collective group of people with personalities. That's the culture when we aggregate that. The plan gives the culture a sense of direction. Now we need to move to the individual direction. So we go to the next step, which is really mapping out, individual processes in the business to achieve those goals and the accountabilities by individual to do that.
Sounds like roles and responsibilities to me is what you're going.
That's exactly right. Clarity of roles and responsibilities. And I'll mention the Tuckman model a little bit later, but plant that seed now. If the listeners are familiar with that, great. If they're not, I would highly encourage doing a little research on the Tuckman model. It's been around for a while, tried and tested, but it really talks about the importance of forming as an organization in order to ultimately perform.
How do you spell that?
Tuckman, Tuckman, the Tuckman model. And that forming, that first step of the Tuckman process, forming, a big part of that is really getting clarity about individual roles. Where is your lane versus my lane? Because when we're crossing over lanes, we run into a lot of conflict, which happens to be the second step of the process, dealing with the storming, the conflict part. And in order to get through that effectively, we really have to get clarity about our roles, our responsibilities, and our accountabilities, and the rules of the game. How are we all going to play so that it's fair? And again, that's the role of the leader. And that's why, again, we have to start with the leader, right? Our thinking as leaders and being leaders.
Now, it sounds a little bit like we're almost rebuilding the entire team structure. And to a certain extent, that's kind of true, right? In a normal office environment, you've got your established patterns of who does what and how things run. I just ran into this with a client the other day. He was complaining about having team meetings via Zoom, and his answer was, I just wanted to go back to being in person. And my feedback was, well, what can you do to make that team meeting more like what you want it to be, rather than just, I'm going to suffer until I can be back in person? And so this is a total restructuring of not what you do, but how you do it. And so you do have to go through these individual steps of, well, Joe used to handle this, but now because we're doing it virtually, maybe Mary's going to have to be responsible for that, right? So even down to that level.
That's an excellent point, Dan. I'd respond to that a couple of ways. First off, there are companies that were doing really well before the COVID virus, and maybe their business didn't change all that much. I mean, I think every business has been impacted at some level, but there are some that maybe haven't shifted a lot. But I find even in those circumstances, a lot of the business owners, especially if they're looking to grow and scale their business, they haven't covered the essential basis to be able to do that. They're not prepared to scale because they really don't have clarity about individual roles and responsibilities, and particular standard operating procedures, so that they can do things consistently and effectively and qualitatively, and everybody know what role they're playing in being able to get those kind of consistent and effective results. But then you've also got a lot of businesses, quite frankly, that have, in some cases had to completely revamp their business model. So you're talking about, in one case, a refining process where you're going through these steps where you may have some of these already covered, but they're not at the level that they need to be. I just engaged a client not long ago where he thought he really had this stuff stamped out. We looked at some operating procedures, even around his sales process, because he has ambitious goals for growth in sales. So let's look at your actual, how do you follow up on a lead? What's the actual step-by-step process by which you go through to make sure that you close a deal? And it was amazing as we began to unpack that, how it was mostly up in his head, and he was counting on several other team members to have in a team sales approach to be able to flow with him through that process. And they were clueless. They were all over the place. So we really had to document that. And it was like, wow, that's amazing clarity.
And Todd, okay, so some of it is going back here, make sure I've got it right, and you got your forming, and you got your uh, performing or norming, and then of course, you're going to have the conflict, etc., as you said. But in the repositioning, if it's just the tweaking, well, that's fairly simple. There, then you just got to identify what those gaps are and how to run a more effective meeting through, same meeting, but it's just a new tool and medium and how you're going to conduct the meeting. So you're going to need some
Sure.
new skills like you're describing there. Then you got to get that person the support he or she needs who's running that meeting to be more effective. There's no, like Dan said, you're not going back. We're still going forward. So we're going to just get you the right tools.
Right.
However, now if look, things have really completely been blown up. Now I don't mean to exaggerate, but now in my assessment and getting clarity here, I don't have the right players
Yes.
for the new world that we're going, or the new normal. How would you go about, in that recruiting process? And if I'm a little ahead of myself, because I know you do an excellent job in this, but how would you go about getting the right person in the right seat? The old Jim Good, right? Point in the right bus, pointing in the right direction.
Absolutely. I mentioned the 7 steps. We've covered, resetting the leadership's mindset. The second was developing a simple business plan and getting everybody moving in the same direction towards that company outcome that they're after. Then it's really turning that into individual responsibilities using operating procedures as a way to clarify your role is this, my role is that, and getting these outcomes. Then you go into position descriptions because I find that in most companies there aren't clear position descriptions, and getting the processes dialed in is important. But then everybody needs to know, what lane are they in? What are my responsibilities versus your responsibilities? And that position description is a great way to help to crystallize that. Then we can get to the step that you're talking about, which is really assess your current reality against your aspirational dream team.
Right.
So now you've got a sense of what you currently have. You've got clarity about the processes, what you're after, the process that it's going to take, and the individual accountabilities that are going to be necessary to achieve those goals. And now you're going to be able to really see where are the critical gaps that you're going to need to fill in order to reach those ambitious goals that you have. And it's an interesting process to think about that. And I would really encourage anybody that goes through this exercise to try to take personalities out of their minds and just think about positions. What are the positions? What are the roles that I really need to have a business, say 2 to 3 to 10 times the size that it is today? And then prioritize what's the right next position that I need. In this environment, it could be just to replace somebody that's already in a seat,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there has been a good bit of turnover in the midst of all this. But once assuming that you're in a good place with that and you're looking for that next position, you have to prioritize that next position. And I find that can be challenging. Do I need this person, or do I need that person first? So it's prioritizing those positions. And it's really looking at, what roles do I need? What responsibilities do those gap roles need to take on? Um, do I currently have the right people and the right fit? And by the way, that's where doing assessments can be really powerful with your existing team. Because you'll find in doing assessments whether or not they have the right aptitude, the right personality, the right skill sets to be able to effectively do their role, and more or less, coalesce and collaborate with the rest of the team effectively. Because remember, we that's a real key, is to work effectively as a team together.
And if I can put a shameless plug in here, Todd, you've been of great help to me in a former role as a president of an organization. I've hired you out numerous times. Look, I need to make sure I get the right person in the right seat.
Mhm.
Here's the roles, here's the responsibilities, and I've given you those, and then then what I need, what to look for. And for those of our listeners, we've got this whole interviewing process, but one piece of that interviewing process is they will take tests from Todd in assessment, and I think it cost me like $500. I don't know if that's the same price or what it was. That was my memory. which could be loose there, but
Yeah, no,
there
it's
was
it's right on
value.
with a full review. Yes.
Yeah, and then they also get an opportunity to sit down with you individually. I'm not there, and you can coach them. Hey, this is a good fit, or it's not a good fit. Here's where you're going to have your challenges. Here's where the growth opportunities are. I just found that was great value, even if they didn't join the team, because they would go away just from a PR standpoint. That's a great organization. You'd be lucky to get in there. And if you live in a community, you don't want to get a bad reputation of a person who just recruits, sticks people up on the wall, and hope they stick.
Yes.
That news travels real quickly. So I would just that whole assessment process I just found to be very, very powerful. Sorry, get a little passionate about that, but I don't have to apologize for being impassioned. What am I doing? That stuff works. It's certifiable good stuff.
Absolutely. No, obviously I'm a strong believer in it, Philip. I think that is a real key. That fifth step is really that assessing current reality and your aspirational dream team is really about trying to maximize what you have and figure out what you don't have and where you need to be going with that next hire, right?
Right.
And these assessments can really accelerate that path to getting peak performance out of your team. Because what is performance as a team? Much of it's communication, right? Just understanding how to communicate with this other person. Because even if we're not crystal clear about our roles and responsibilities, and let's face it, even if we are, there's a lot of gray area. So we're going to bump into one another. We're going to have differences. I thought I was supposed to do this and I was going to do it this way. And no, you say I need to do it that way. And there's where you have the next step of the Tuckman process. After forming, we end up storming. We end up bumping into each other's. Our ideas and ways of doing things conflict. And so, how do we manage through that? And if I know how I'm wired and what my triggers are, then I can manage those better when I'm communicating with you, Philip.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know your triggers and your personality quirks, then you can manage yours better. And we can go a step beyond that. If I know what your triggers are and I know how you're wired to think, then I can communicate in a way that resonates with you and that doesn't trip your triggers.
Novel concept, but it's absolutely right. And it's all about self-awareness, going back to step one, knowing who you are. And if you can't manage yourself, how are you ever going to be able to manage others? Because people
Amen.
are going to be watching you, not so much what you say, but they're going to be learning more about your behaviors. And do those behaviors match with your words? So,
Well, and there's two big things about the assessments that I always find really, really useful. Number one is my own biases around
Mm,
either a new candidate or existing team members.
right.
And then secondly is the ability for especially existing team members to develop. Like if we know where they are now and what their abilities are now, we can offer them the route to develop into what we need in the future or choose not to. Hey, okay, this role, if I'm going to be doing 10 times the business in 5 years, has to be something different and you don't want to do that. Well, we know that now and let's find a different role for you.
Exactly.
well, yeah, I was going to mimic that, parrot that exactly, Dan, because you make a couple key points, what I've just personally experienced in the senior executive role, etc., is role perception. The follower doesn't own it. The leader owns role perceptions. Here's what I'm looking for. Role perception. Do you accept these tasks, by the way, as part of your job, etc.? So the leader has to define that, and you can work with the employee, the team member, or, with in that process. But at the end of the day, then what I've found, if you're going to set new expectations and you provide support, then because you determine that person is willing, the key word is willing, and sees the incentive to make the change, well, then you're going to build trust. But if you set expectations and not provide the support during this whole process, not only are you going to go regressive and go back to that conflict that you were talking about, but the trust isn't going to be there. And then without trust, you can't influence. It's going to be hard to create this high winning performance culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are I think we're on step 5. What are the last 2?
The last 2. So I think this also ties into what Philip was talking about earlier, is when you do have a gap, what do you do next? You obviously have to hire, right? But what I find is that hiring processes are really not processes for most companies out there, or for many companies or businesses, especially small businesses. They don't really have a process. They come up with some job description that looks halfway decent. They throw it out there in Indeed or some other form, and they hope to cast a net that will bring in some fish. And then they have a conversation, and after a few conversations, they make a decision. And welcome aboard. That's about it, right? You're done.
Oops, so-and-so's starting tomorrow. What do we do?
Exactly. And then I'm coaching that individual and find out 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, if not months later, geez, I didn't realize I was going to have to do that. This is really rough. I didn't know that was an expectation. And so I would say, when you're going through a hiring process, map out a process. Be intentional with the process. When you're bringing folks in, have a step 1 interview, a step 2 interview, and maybe a step 3 interview. Don't make a 1 interview decision. At least make it a 2 to 3 interview decision. And the other thing I would add is for goodness sake, please use an assessment of some sort during the hiring process. It's not the end all be all, but it adds so much color to the picture. It accelerates your learning curve about that individual exponentially, and will actually give you some clues, some real hints as to where you need to dig and fish in your interview process to know whether or not they're the right fit. And that's good for you, and it's good for them. You don't want to hire somebody that it's not a good fit, because that's bad for them. They don't know what they don't know. So you, as somebody that's hiring, have more responsibility than they do, actually, in that regard, because you know more about your environment than they do. They're only going by what you tell them.
And that's, I couldn't concur more. And for our listeners, I would suggest this too, and to build on what you just said, Todd. For example, that interview, once you've got your roles, responsibilities, well, then you frame your questions and the interviewing questions around those roles and responsibilities / competencies that you're looking for. Because not these theoretical, hypothetical questions, because past behavior is a darn good indicator of future behavior. So that would be interview 1. And then interview 2 in our old process and old companies I worked for. And I just took it after once I learned this process, because there's the recruiting stage, getting the cheeks in the seats that you're going to interview, and you're going to and for every 4 you want to interviews, you hire 1. If you're less than that, well, you probably don't have a good enough selection pool from, and anything more than that, you're probably wasting your time. So I like to use 4 to 1. For every 4 people I hire, I'm going to interview, and I'm going to hire 1. But the key then was the selection process, and the selection process is, to help me with that, I would have someone else interview this for the second interview, on someone else being a member of the team. And then that person, hey, here's some questions, can you expound on this, get a better answer? Here's some ones that, other questions I need to have, that I didn't get to cover these. Then we would do the assessment process. And then in the meantime, while they got the assessment process with, in this case, it was you, Todd, and in the former company, then we would have them interview other members of the team and give them a chance to make sure, if I was, the culture I described here is really happening. So they have an opportunity to confirm that this is a place they want to work with. These are the team members. The team members get to weigh in. Is this the person? Then our 4th one was the good, the bad, the ugly. Here's, total economic package. Here's, let's go through everything. Because what I don't want to have happen is what you said, Todd. 6 months from now, they said, hey, this isn't what I signed up for, or I had to hire you out to bring the coaching because I screwed up.
Fix it.
I've let them down. They haven't let me down, is my point.
Well, and I would add to that, I know there are probably some people out there saying, wow, that sounds like just a really long and arduous process. But in my experience, some of my best points in my career actually were interview processes where I went through this style, not exactly the same as that, but there's one in particular where I got through to the fourth interview, and it was the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it was with the big manager, the boss of my boss. And at the end of that, he looked at my assessments and he basically said, hey, look, this job is yours if you want it, but you need to go home and decide where you want your career to go. Because I think in your mind, you're headed in a different direction and you need to be heading over there. I'm not going to give all the details of it, but it was really a kind of crystallizing moment in my career where I took a step back and I said, wow, you know what? This company's really trying to guide me to the correct direction.
Yes.
And I didn't end up working with them. And it's what led me into the training side and sales side of things more than having been in operations and compliance before.
Well, entrepreneurs and leaders oftentimes glaze over at these lengthy kind of processes because they're action-oriented people. They just want to get it done like yesterday, right? But what they are very familiar with is a bottom line. They're very familiar with expenses and cost. And there are very few overhead items as large and significant as your employees, first off. And secondly, the cost of a bad hire is huge. And it's not just financial. It's in all the soft dollars that you can't totally measure. Like how much time is a key leader spending dealing with a problem employee and taking their eyes off of opportunities that they could be pursuing, advancing the company, getting more sales, generating more opportunities. I mean, it's amazing. Just a small example is if you wouldn't believe how much time I spend, of course, they're spending money on me as a coach. How much time do we spend in our conversations talking about remedial issues with employees? That right there is a hard cost. And that's just one small example.
Right.
So,
as expected, this conversation has been awesome. And so, Todd, I want to ask you if you have the ability to come back next week and finish up this. We'll finish up number 6 and go into number 7, and then we'll also ask some questions. Does that work with your schedule?
absolutely. Happy to do it.
Fantastic. So definitely check back next week. We are going to wrap up our main section. And in fact, we are not going to cover our article review. We will also tie that in next week as well. If you have topics that you would like us to cover or questions for us, reach out to us via email, info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. We also have our social media links. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook links are all at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. If you would like to get in touch with Todd, check out his website at roicoachingsolutions.com. Again, that's roicoachingsolutions.com. Or you can email him, Todd, at myroicoach.com, or reach him by phone 704-634-3180. Again, that's 704-634-3180. Wherever you find the podcast, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon, please consider subscribing. We also have a YouTube channel. You can find us there by searching Value-Ability on YouTube, or you can find us on our website, value-ability.com, under the episode player. All of our episodes are there. Next episode, episode 51, we're going to have Todd back to finish up building high-performance teams in a virtual world. What questions do you have about building, leading, or being a part of a team in today's changing business landscape? Reach out to us and let us know. Until then, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next week. And remember that financial success comes from creating a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will get you there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.